I never thought I would pretend to leave my own home just to discover the truth about the man I had loved for more than 30 years. But that night, I packed a small suitcase, kissed my husband goodbye, and walked out the front door knowing I was not really leaving. He was waiting. My name is Linda Harper, and for most of my 66 years, I believed I understood what a strong marriage looked like. My husband Robert and I had built a life together in a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio. We had raised our children, celebrated birthdays, welcomed grandchildren, and created countless memories inside the same house we had called home for decades. From the outside, we looked like the kind of couple people admired. The kind of couple who had made it through every challenge life brought them. But recently, something had changed. It was not one big moment. It was small things that slowly became impossible to ignore. Robert started spending more time on his phone. It became quieter during dinner. It would leave the room whenever certain conversations came up. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. After 38 years of marriage, you learn that not every change means something is wrong. People get older. People become tired. People have stressful seasons in life. He wanted to believe that was all it was. He wanted to believe the man who had held my hand through difficult times was still the same man I knew. But the feeling inside me kept growing. It was not suspicion. It was something deeper. It was the feeling that I was no longer part of conversations happening inside my own family. A few weeks before everything changed, I noticed Robert had started acting differently whenever our granddaughter visited. We had a baby monitor in the living room because we often helped care for her when our daughter needed support. It was an ordinary part of our home. Something we never thought twice about. But one evening, I walked into the room and saw Robert quickly turning off his phone when I entered. He smiled and said it was nothing. He smiled back. But I remembered. That was something age had taught me. You do not have to react to every strange moment. Sometimes you simply notice. The next week, I decided to visit my daughter for a few days. He told Robert the first needed some time to help with the baby and enjoy being with family. He seemed almost relieved. That reaction stayed with me. A husband who misses his wife usually does not look relieved when she leaves. He did not accuse him. He did not ask questions. He simply packed my things and watched carefully. Before I left, I made sure the house looked exactly as it always did. He placed my favorite coffee mug beside the kitchen sink. He folded the blanket on the couch. He said goodbye the same way I had done many times before. But this time, I was carrying a question with me. Later that evening, after arriving at my daughter's house, I sat quietly in the guest room. He looked at my phone for a long time. My heart was telling me two different things. One part of me wanted to believe I was overthinking everything. The other part of me knew I needed answers. He opened the baby monitor app that was still connected to our home system. He did not know what I expected to hear. Maybe nothing. Maybe a simple conversation that would prove my worries were unnecessary. He told myself I was only looking for reassurance. But when the sound came through, I realized my life was about to change. Because the voice I heard was my husband's. And the words he spoke were not words meant for me to hear. I sat in the quiet guest room at my daughter's house, holding my phone in my hand and listening carefully. At first, I heard only the normal sounds of my home. The soft hum of the air conditioner. The occasional movement of someone walking through the hallway. The ordinary sounds that had surrounded me for decades. For a brief moment, I almost felt relieved. I almost convinced myself that I had imagined everything. That maybe my worries had grown bigger than the reality. Then I heard Robert's voice. My husband's voice. The same voice I had woken up beside for 38 years. But the words I heard were not the words of the man I thought I knew. It was talking to someone else in the house. He could not hear every detail clearly, but I heard enough to understand that it was discussing something he had never mentioned to me. It spoke about decisions involving our family and our future as if my opinion was not important. As if I was someone who needed to be managed instead of someone who deserved to be included. He sat there frozen, not because of one sentence, but because of what that sentence represented. It made me question all the moments I had ignored. All the times I told myself everything was fine. He remembered the little changes. The way Robert stopped asking for my thoughts on certain matters. The way he became distant whenever I tried to understand what was bothering him. The way conversations that once lasted for hours had become short answers and polite smiles. He had spent so much time protecting the image of our marriage that I forgot to ask whether I still felt valued inside it. He turned off the monitor after a few minutes. He did not want to listen to every word. There are moments when you already know enough. He placed my phone on the table and sat quietly. My first feeling was not anger. It was sadness. Deep, heavy sadness. Because when someone you love disappoints you, the pain is not only about what happened. It is about the memories you have to look at differently afterward. He thought about our first house. The small kitchen where we cooked together when we were younger. The vacations we saved for years to take. The nights we stayed awake talking about our dreams for our children. Those moments were real. He knew that. But now I also had to accept that another reality existed alongside those memories. The next morning, my daughter noticed something was wrong. Emily had always been able to read my expression better than anyone. "Mom, are you okay?" she asked while we sat at her kitchen table. He wanted to say yes. That was my usual answer. For years, I had said yes even when I was tired, worried, or hurt. But this time, I paused. "I am trying to understand something," I finally said. She looked at me carefully. He did not tell her everything immediately. I did not want to put her in the middle of her parents' relationship or make her feel responsible for my pain. But I told her that I had heard something from Robert that troubled me. Emily reached across the table and held my hand. "Mom, you always tell me to trust my feelings," she said. "Maybe you need to trust yours too." Those words stayed with me. Because she was right. For so many years, I had taught my children to respect themselves. He had encouraged them to speak up when something felt wrong. But I had forgotten to follow my own advice. That afternoon, I returned to my house. Walking through the front door felt different. Everything looked exactly the same. The family pictures were still on the walls. The furniture was still in the same place. But I was not the same person who had walked out a few days earlier. He no longer wanted to discover the truth because I was afraid of what I might find. He wanted to know because I finally understood that I deserved honesty. And that was when I decided I would stop guessing and start paying attention. I spent the next few days doing something I had avoided for a long time. He paid attention. Not with anger. Not with the intention of finding reasons to blame Robert. He simply allowed myself to notice the things I had been ignoring. When you spend decades with someone, you learn their routines. You know the sound of their footsteps, the way they make their coffee, the small habits they repeat every day. You also notice when those things begin to change. After returning home, I watched Robert more carefully. He noticed how often he stepped outside to take phone calls. He noticed how quickly he changed conversations when I entered the room. He noticed how comfortable he had become making decisions without asking what I thought. Before, I had explained these things away. He told myself that after many years together, people naturally become less expressive. He told myself that not every quiet moment meant there was a problem. But now I understood something important. Ignoring the problem does not make it disappear. It only gives it more time to grow. One evening, Robert came home and acted as if nothing had changed. He kissed me on the cheek, asked about my day, and started preparing dinner. To anyone else, it would have looked like a normal evening between a married couple. But I felt the distance between us. It was not because I no longer cared. It was because I was seeing things more clearly. "How was your afternoon?" he asked. "It was fine," I answered. The words came out naturally. For years, I had been trained by my own habits to keep things simple. To avoid creating tension. To make everyone comfortable. But instead, I was asking questions I had never allowed myself to ask before. Who was Robert talking to? What decisions had he made without me? Why did he believe I did not need to know? That night, after Robert went to bed, I sat in the living room with a notebook. He wrote down everything I remembered. Not only from the recent weeks, but from the past year. He wrote about conversations that ended suddenly. He wrote about plans he made without discussing them with me. He wrote about moments when I felt like a guest in my own marriage. Looking at those notes was difficult. Not because every memory was painful. Many were beautiful. But I started seeing a pattern. There were moments when Robert had slowly begun separating himself from me emotionally. The next morning, I called my close friend Susan. We had known each other for more than 20 years. She was one of the few people who knew my marriage well but also knew me as an individual. We met at a small coffee shop near my neighborhood. He did not tell her everything immediately. He needed to say the words carefully. Sometimes speaking the truth out loud makes it feel more real. "I think something has changed with Robert," I finally said. Susan listened without interrupting. When I finished explaining what happened, she looked at me gently. "Linda, you have spent your entire marriage protecting everyone else's feelings. When did you stop asking whether someone was protecting yours?" That question stayed with me. Because I did not have an answer. He had always measured my success as a wife and mother by how happy the people around me were. He had never considered that my own happiness deserved the same attention. Later that week, I checked the baby monitor system again. Not because I wanted to invade Anjona's privacy. Not because I wanted to search for something to use against Robert. He wanted clarity. He wanted to understand whether the moment I heard was something isolated or part of something bigger. He sat quietly and listened. This time, I did not feel the same shock as before. He felt prepared. He knew that whatever I discovered, I would handle it differently than the woman I had been years ago. I was no longer the person who ignored her own feelings to keep the peace. He was a woman who had spent a lifetime caring for others, and now I was finally learning to care for herself. And as the sound came through the monitor again, I heard something that made me realize the truth was much deeper than I had imagined. The second time I listened through the baby monitor, I was not searching for a reason to be hurt. He was searching for the truth. There is a difference between those two things. For most of my life, I had believed that love meant giving people the benefit of the doubt. He believed marriage meant standing beside someone through every season, even the difficult ones. But I was beginning to understand that trust also required honesty from both sides. That evening, I sat quietly in my daughter's guest room while the monitor connected to our home. He kept my expectations low. A part of me still hoped I would hear something simple. Something that would explain everything. Something that would allow me to return to my old life without questions. But when Robert's voice came through again, I realized I had been avoiding a truth that had been waiting for me. It was talking about plans he had been making without my involvement. Plans about our future. Plans about our home. Plans that affected both of us. What surprised me most was not that he had ideas of his own. After 38 years of marriage, I understood that two people could have different thoughts and still love each other. What hurt was the way he spoke about me. It described me as someone who would not understand. Someone who would ask too many questions. Someone who would make things more complicated. He sat there quietly, feeling a sadness that was difficult to explain. Because the woman he was describing was not who I believed I was. He had spent my entire adult life trying to make our family stronger. He had supported his career. He had cared for our children. He had been there during difficult times when life did not go according to plan. Yet somehow, I had become the person whose opinion was no longer necessary. After turning off the monitor, I stayed in the room for a long time. He did not cry. He did not call Robert. He did not send an angry message. Instead, I opened my notebook and wrote one sentence at the top of the page. I need to remember who I am. Those words surprised me. Because for years, my identity had been connected to the people I loved. He was Robert's wife. Emily's mother. The person everyone called when they needed help. He had rarely asked myself who Linda was when nobody needed anything from her. The next morning, I returned home earlier than Robert expected. It was in the kitchen making coffee when I walked through the door. He looked surprised but quickly smiled. I thought you were staying another day, he said. He placed my bag down and smiled politely. I decided I was ready to come home. He continued talking about ordinary things. The weather. The neighbors. His plans for the weekend. He listened carefully. There was a time when I would have ignored the feeling inside me and returned to normal. But something had changed. He was no longer trying to protect a version of our marriage that only existed because I refused to ask questions. That afternoon, I called an old family friend named Michael Reynolds, someone who had known both Robert and me for many years. He did not tell him every detail. He simply explained that I needed perspective from someone I trusted. He listened and then said something I never forgot. Linda, sometimes people become comfortable with the person who always forgives them. They forget that forgiveness does not mean permission. Those words gave me clarity. He was not trying to punish Robert. He was not trying to destroy my family. He was trying to understand why I had been left outside decisions that affected my own life. Over the next few days, I began gathering information. He reviewed old conversations. He looked back at messages. He paid attention to details I had ignored before. Every piece did not create anger. It created understanding. He finally saw that this was not one sudden change. It was a slow distance that had grown between us while I was busy believing everything was fine. The hardest part was accepting that I could love my husband and still admit that something was wrong. Both things could be true. And as I sat at my kitchen table that night, looking at the notes in front of me, I knew I had reached a point where I could no longer simply hope things would change. I needed to decide what I would do next. The days that followed were quiet, but they were not the same kind of quiet I had known before. In the past, silence in my home meant comfort. It meant peace after a long day. It meant sitting beside Robert with a cup of coffee and feeling grateful for the life we had built together. Now, silence felt different. It felt like a space where I was finally able to hear my own thoughts. He began to understand that I had spent years listening to everyone else while ignoring the small voice inside me. The voice that noticed when something felt wrong. The voice that asked questions I was afraid to answer. He did not want to make decisions based only on emotion. He wanted clarity. So I started by doing something simple. He wrote everything down. He created a timeline of the changes I had noticed over the past year. The conversations that ended quickly. The moments when Robert avoided certain topics. The times when I felt like I was being informed about decisions instead of being included in them. Looking at those notes was difficult, but it also gave me peace. My feelings were not coming from nowhere. There were patterns I had overlooked because I wanted to believe everything was fine. A few days later, I met my friend Susan for coffee. We sat near the window of a small cafe not far from my neighborhood. Susan had known me for more than 20 years. She knew my personality. She knew how much I valued my marriage and my family. She also knew that I was the kind of person who often put my own needs last. Linda, she said after listening to everything I shared, you have always been the person who keeps everyone together. But who makes sure you are okay? He looked down at my coffee cup because I did not have an answer. That question followed me for the rest of the day. Because it was true. He had spent so much time being a wife, a mother, and a grandmother that I had forgotten I was also a person with my own feelings and needs. Later that week, I decided to speak with someone who could help me understand my options. Not because I wanted to end my marriage. Not because I wanted to create a battle. He simply wanted to understand what steps I could take if I needed to protect myself. He contacted a family counselor named Dr. Rachel Bennett, someone recommended by a trusted friend. During our conversation, I explained everything that had happened. He told her about the baby monitor. I told her about Robert's conversations. He told her about the feeling that I had slowly become invisible in my own marriage. She listened carefully before responding. Linda, sometimes the most painful part of a relationship problem is not the event itself. It is realizing that communication disappeared long before the problem became obvious. Her words made sense. The issue was not only what Robert had said. The issue was how long I had felt disconnected from him. That evening, I returned home and looked around the house. Every room held memories. The kitchen where we prepared holiday meals. The hallway where we watched our children grow. The living room where we celebrated birthdays. This house was not just a building. It represented a lifetime of experiences. But I also realized something important. A home is not only made of walls and memories. It is made of trust. And trust requires both people to show up honestly. The next morning, Robert asked why I had been so quiet lately. For a moment, I considered giving my usual answer. I am fine. Those words had protected everyone else for years. But this time, I chose something different. I am thinking, I said. He looked surprised. About what? He held his gaze. About us. He became quiet. He could see that he was not expecting that answer. He did not explain everything yet. He was not ready. He needed to understand my own feelings before asking him to face them. But I knew something had changed inside me. He was no longer waiting for someone else to decide whether my concerns mattered. He had spent years building a family. Now I needed to make sure I was not losing myself while trying to keep it together. I spent the next few days preparing myself for a conversation I knew would not be easy. He had spent my entire marriage trying to solve problems before they became conflicts. He was the person who chose the right words carefully. The person who waited until everyone else felt comfortable before sharing what I needed. But I realized something important. Avoiding a difficult conversation does not always protect a relationship. Sometimes it only allows distance to grow quietly between two people. One evening, Robert and I sat at the kitchen table after dinner. It was the same table where we had shared thousands of conversations over the years. We had planned vacations there. We had discussed our children's futures there. We had celebrated good news and supported each other through difficult seasons. Looking at that table reminded me of everything we had built together. But it also reminded me of what had changed. Robert noticed I was quieter than usual. Linda, something has been bothering you for a while, he said. It was not a question. It was an observation. He looked at him and took a deep breath. Yes, I answered. I waited. He could see he was expecting me to explain. For a moment, the old version of myself wanted to change the subject. She wanted to say that everything was fine. She wanted to protect the comfortable routine we had created. But I was tired of pretending that silence meant peace. I feel like there are parts of your life that you have stopped sharing with me, I said. Robert looked surprised. What makes you think that? He stayed calm. Because I have felt a distance between us. And I do not want to ignore it anymore. I looked down at the table. That small reaction told me more than words could. Linda, you are reading too much into things, he said. He listened carefully. There was a time when those words would have made me question myself immediately. He would have wondered if I was being too emotional. If I was creating a problem that did not exist. But this time, I trusted my own experience. Maybe I am missing something, I said. But I think we need to talk honestly about what has changed between us. The conversation did not become an argument. It became something much harder. It became honest. Robert admitted that he had been thinking about several major decisions regarding our future. He admitted that he had not included me in those conversations because he thought I would worry too much. Hearing that was painful. Not because he had thoughts of his own. Everyone deserves to have their own thoughts and feelings. What hurt was that he had already decided my reaction before giving me a chance to speak. You made a choice for me without asking me, I said quietly. I looked away. I thought I was protecting you. He shook my head gently. Protecting someone does not mean removing their right to know. The room became quiet. But this time, the silence felt different. It was not the silence of avoidance. It was the silence of two people finally facing something real. Later that night, I went to my bedroom and thought about everything that had happened. He thought about the baby monitor. He thought about the conversations I overheard. He thought about the years I spent believing that love alone could solve everything. He still loved Robert. That had not disappeared. Love does not simply vanish because someone disappoints you. But I also understood that love without respect cannot create a healthy relationship. The next morning, I received a message from my daughter Emily. She asked how I was doing. He stared at the screen before replying. For years, I had always told her I was fine. This time, I wrote something different. I am learning to listen to myself. A few minutes later, she replied. I am proud of you, Mom. Those simple words meant more than she probably realized. Because for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was not just protecting my family. I was protecting the woman I had become. And I knew the next step would require courage, because understanding the truth was only the beginning. Now I had to decide what that truth meant for my future. I used to believe that the hardest moments in life were the ones where something happened suddenly. A phone call you did not expect. A difficult conversation. A piece of news that changed everything in an instant. But I learned that sometimes the hardest moments are the quiet ones. The moments when you realize the truth has been sitting in front of you for a long time, and you were simply not ready to see it. After my conversation with Robert, I spent several days thinking about what came next. He did not want to make decisions based on disappointment. He did not want my hurt to control my actions. He wanted to move forward with the same calm and dignity I had always tried to bring into my family. But I also knew I could not return to pretending nothing had changed. One Saturday morning, Emily came to my house with her daughter. The moment I saw them walk through the door, I felt a reminder of what truly mattered. My family was not just a marriage. It was the relationships I had built, the love I had given, and the people who cared about me. We sat together in the living room while my granddaughter played nearby. Emily looked at me carefully. Mom, You seem different, she said. He smiled softly. Different how? She thought for a moment. Like you are not carrying everything by yourself anymore. Her words touched me because they were true. For years, I believed being strong meant handling everything quietly. I thought a good wife and mother was someone who absorbed difficulties so everyone else could remain comfortable. But I was beginning to understand that strength also meant being honest about what I needed. That afternoon, Emily asked if I wanted to talk about Robert. I hesitated. I did not want her to feel caught between her parents. I did not want my pain to become her burden. I love your father, I told her. That has not changed. But I also need to be honest about how I feel. Emily nodded. I think that is fair. Those words gave me comfort. Because I was not looking for people to choose sides. I was looking for understanding. Later that week, I had another conversation with Robert. This time, I approached it differently. He was not asking questions because I was afraid. He was asking because I knew I deserved answers. Robert, I said, I need to understand why you stopped including me in decisions that affected both of us. He sat quietly for a moment. Then he admitted something I had not expected. He said he had become used to making choices on his own because he believed it would avoid disagreements. He said he convinced himself that keeping certain things from me was easier than having difficult conversations. Listening to him was painful, but it also gave me clarity. The issue was not only the information he kept from me. The issue was that he had forgotten we were supposed to face life together. A marriage cannot work when one person decides what the other person can handle, I said. He nodded slowly. I understand that now. He wanted to believe those words. A part of me hoped they were the beginning of something better. But I also knew trust was not rebuilt by promises alone. It was rebuilt through actions over time. That evening, I walked through the house and looked at all the memories around me. The photographs. The furniture we chose together. The small details that represented years of life side by side. I realized something important. My marriage was part of my story, but it was not the entire story of who I was. I was still Linda Harper. I was still a mother. I was still a grandmother. I was still a woman with dreams, feelings, and value. The next morning, I opened the curtains and let the sunlight fill the room. For the first time in a long time, I did not feel like I was waiting for someone else to decide what happened next. I knew I had choices. I knew my voice mattered. And whatever came after this, I would face it as the woman I had finally learned to become. I spent the following weeks learning something I had never truly understood before. Healing does not always look like a dramatic moment where everything suddenly feels better. Sometimes healing is simply waking up one morning and realizing you are no longer carrying the same weight in your heart. I was still processing everything that had happened with Robert, but I was no longer living in confusion. He had questions. Answer. He had conversations I once avoided. Most importantly, I had started listening to myself again. Robert and I began having more honest conversations. They were not always comfortable, but they were real. For years, we had focused on keeping life running smoothly. We paid bills, raised children, attended family events, and handled responsibilities. We became experts at managing life together, but somewhere along the way, we stopped talking about how we actually felt. That was something we needed to face. One evening, Robert and I sat on the back porch watching the sunset. It was a place where we had spent many peaceful evenings over the years. He looked at me and said something I never expected to hear. Linda, I realize now that I stopped seeing you as my partner in certain parts of my life. He listened quietly. I thought I was avoiding problems, but I was actually creating distance between us. His honesty did not erase what happened. It did not magically rebuild all the trust that had been damaged. But it was the first time I felt like he was truly seeing the impact of his choices. Robert, I said, I do not need you to be perfect. No obedies. But I need to know that my voice matters. En nadie. It does. He wanted to believe him, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were having a conversation instead of simply exchanging words. He also began making changes in my own life. He started spending more time with friends. He returned to hobbies I had put aside while focusing on everyone else. He joined a local gardening group and started attending weekly meetings. Those small choices reminded me that I was still a person with interests, dreams, and goals beyond being Someone's wife or mother. One afternoon, Emily visited me and noticed the changes immediately. "Mom, you seem happier," she said. "Ismail. I think I am finally remembering who I am." She hugged me and said, "I always knew you were strong. I just think you are finally seeing it too." That moment meant so much to me because I realized something. The difficult experience with Robert had not taken away my ability to love. It had simply taught me that love should not require me to disappear. A few months earlier, I would have been terrified of anything that threatened the image of my perfect family. Now, I understood that a perfect image was never the goal. A healthy relationship built on honesty was the goal. One afternoon, I walked through the house and noticed all the small things that had changed. The atmosphere felt lighter. Conversations felt more open. There was still work to do. Trust was still something we were rebuilding. But I no longer felt like I was waiting for someone else to decide my future. He was participating in creating it. Robert and I were not returning to the exact relationship we had before. In some ways, that was a good thing. The old relationship had been built on assumptions and silence. The new one had a chance to be built on communication and respect. Looking back, I realized the moment I discovered the truth was painful, but it also gave me something valuable. It gave me the courage to stop accepting a life where my feelings came last. I learned that being a loving wife did not mean ignoring myself. Being a supportive mother did not mean forgetting my own needs. And being part of a family did not mean losing my own identity. I was still Linda Harper. I was still the woman who cared deeply about the people she loved. But now I was also the woman who understood that she deserved the same kindness she gave to everyone else. I used to believe that the strongest families were the ones that never faced serious problems. I thought a successful marriage meant proving to the world that nothing could break you. But after everything I experienced with Robert, I understood something much deeper. A strong family is not one without struggles. A strong family is one where people are willing to face those struggles honestly and grow from them. Months passed, and my life slowly settled into a new rhythm. The house that once felt filled with unanswered questions became a place where I felt comfortable again. I started enjoying the simple moments I had forgotten to appreciate. Morning coffee on the porch. Time in my garden. Conversations with Emily and my grandchildren. Small moments that reminded me life was not defined by one painful chapter. Robert and I continued working on our relationship. It was not perfect. I do not believe any relationship is. But there was something different between us now. We talked more openly. We asked questions instead of making assumptions. We listened instead of waiting for our turn to speak. Rebuilding trust took time, but I realized that was how trust was supposed to work. It was not something repaired with one apology or one conversation. It was something rebuilt through consistent choices. One afternoon, Robert and I looked through old family photographs together. We found pictures from when our children were young. We found pictures from vacations, holidays, and ordinary days that had become special memories. I held one picture for a long time. It was from our first years of marriage. We have been through a lot, he said quietly. He nodded. Yes, we have. He looked at me and said, I do not want us to ever stop being honest with each other again. He appreciated those words because they came from understanding, not just regret. He also understood something about myself. He had spent many years believing that forgiveness meant returning to the way things were before. But forgiveness does not always mean going backward. Sometimes it means moving forward with new wisdom. It means remembering what happened without allowing it to control your future. Emily continued to be an important part of my life. One weekend, we sat together in my garden while my grandchildren played nearby. She smiled and said, Mom, I think this experience changed you. He looked at the flowers growing around us. It did, I answered. But maybe not in the way people would expect. She asked what I meant. He told her that I did not become colder. He did not stop caring. He simply learned that caring for others and caring for myself were not opposite things. They could exist together. That lesson was one I wished I had learned years earlier. For most of my life, I had measured my value by how much I could give. I thought being needed was the same as being loved. But I finally understood that true love also includes being respected, heard, and appreciated. Looking back at the night he left home pretending to be gone, I no longer saw it as only a painful memory. I saw it as the moment I finally listened to myself. That decision gave me answers, but it also gave me something even more important. It gave me the confidence to trust my own feelings. I was no longer the woman who ignored her concerns to keep everyone comfortable. I was no longer the woman who believed silence was always the same as peace. I was Linda Harper. A wife. A mother. A grandmother. But most importantly, I was a woman who understood her own worth. My journey was never about proving someone else wrong. It was about remembering that my voice mattered. That my feelings mattered. That my life mattered. And in the end, the greatest thing I discovered was not what someone else had been hiding from me. It was the strength I had been carrying inside myself all along.